Imagine discovering your husband isn't just betraying you, but betraying you with your own sister. Together, they had plotted every step. Divorce me, take half of my 100 million fortune, and run away to start a brand new life without me. They thought their plan was flawless, but what they never expected was that the moment I uncovered their secret, I made a single move that turned their dream into their worst nightmare. My name is Clara Reynolds, though most people know me as Clara Bennett, after I took my husband's last name. For years, I thought I was living the dream, a successful career, a beautiful home, and a marriage that looked perfect from the outside. But sometimes, the picture-perfect life is just a painted mask, hiding cracks you don't notice until it shatters right in front of you. I built my fortune long before marriage. Straight out of college, I started a real estate company with nothing but grit, sleepless nights, and the refusal to give up. The business grew fast, and soon what was once a small hustle turned into a thriving empire. Every deal I made, every building I developed, every sleepless night, it all added up to a net worth of over $100 million. That was my blood, my sweat, my sacrifice. When I met Daniel Bennett, he was charming in a way that caught me off guard. He wasn't wealthy, not then, but he had the kind of confidence that made you believe he could conquer the world. He made me laugh. He looked at me like I wasn't just some powerful businesswoman, but a woman he wanted to cherish. And for a while, I believed in that love. I believed in him. We married in an elegant but simple ceremony. No grand displays, no magazine spreads, just friends and family gathered in a garden that smelled of roses. Daniel promised me forever, and I believed every word. He was ambitious too, though his career never quite took off the way mine did. Still, I thought love wasn't measured in dollar signs. I didn't care that I made more. I cared that he was by my side. But over time, little things began to shift. Daniel grew restless. He didn't like that I was always the one people looked to, the one making decisions, the one earning more. He tried to hide it, but I saw it in his eyes when people called me the powerhouse. He smiled, but inside, he hated being the shadow to my light. And then there was my sister, Melissa. Huh. We were close once, at least I thought we were, but jealousy has a way of poisoning blood ties. Melissa was the kind of woman who always wanted what I had. If I got straight A's, she complained that teachers favored me. If I got a promotion, she sulked about her dead-end job. When I got married, she smiled for photos, but I noticed her eyes linger on Daniel a little too long. At first, I brushed it off. Families are complicated, right? Siblings fight, they compare, they compete. But Melissa's envy was different. It didn't fade as we grew older. It deepened. She hated that I had built something she never could. She hated that I was admired, respected, envied. And Daniel? He was just another prize for her to take. It started subtly. She visited more often, sometimes under the guise of helping me with errands or checking in on us. She'd sit in my kitchen sipping wine, laughing at Daniel's jokes, her hand brushing his arm just a little too casually. Once, I walked into the living room and found them whispering together, their laughter cutting off the moment I entered. Their eyes met for a split second. Guilt flickered, then disappeared. I told myself I was imagining things. I had always worked long hours. Maybe I was just paranoid, overthinking. But the more I tried to dismiss the signs, the louder they screamed at me. Daniel started working late nights. Melissa started showing up when she knew I'd be busy. And then came the secrecy. The hushed phone calls, the abrupt silences, the looks they thought I wouldn't notice. One evening, Daniel left his laptop open on the counter. I walked past it on my way to the bedroom, not even intending to snoop, but curiosity tugged at me when I saw an email notification. My name wasn't on it, but Melissa's was. My heart pounded as I hovered over it, torn between respect for privacy and a gnawing dread that privacy had already been destroyed. I clicked, and there it was. Messages, too many to count. Not just flirting, not just stolen words of affection, but full-on planning. Plans to be together, plans to take everything from me. Melissa wrote things like, "Once she's out of the way, it's just us and the money." Daniel responded with, "The divorce will secure my half. She won't fight it. She never sees these things coming." I froze. The betrayal was a punch to the gut, stealing the air from my lungs. My husband, my sister, the two people I trusted most had been plotting my destruction, smiling in my face while planning to rip my life apart. I didn't confront him, not that night, not the next. Something inside me hardened, colder than ice. If I lashed out now, I'd lose. They'd hide evidence, cover tracks, twist narratives. No, I needed to be smarter than that. The next morning, I brewed coffee like nothing was wrong. I kissed Daniel's cheek before he left for work, ignoring the bile in my throat. Later that afternoon, I met Melissa for brunch, hugged her tightly, and let her ramble about trivial things as though my world hadn't just collapsed. I played my role perfectly, sweet, unsuspecting Clara. But inside, I was already making calculations. My mind turned like a machine, whirring with strategy. I thought of the empire I had built, the buildings, the accounts, the investments. I thought of the vultures circling, believing they could tear it apart and feed off the remains. I couldn't let them. I wouldn't. That night, I sat in my office long after the city went quiet. I, I knew I couldn't confront them. Not yet. Confrontation would give them power. It would let them twist the story, paint me as paranoid, or worse, rush their plan before I was ready. No, the only way to win against betrayal that deep was to stay quiet, to let them believe I was still blind. Silence was my sharpest weapon. The first step was simple: protect what was mine. I called my attorney, a woman I trusted with more than my life. We met in the back corner of a quiet cafe, no assistants, no paper trail. I told her everything. Well, almost everything. I didn't mention the affair, just the whispers of divorce and Daniel's sudden interest in finances. She nodded slowly, her face unreadable, then leaned in. If he's planning to come after your assets, we'll move them before he even gets the chance. Over the next week, I became a master actress. I cooked dinners with Daniel, laughed at his jokes, and pretended not to notice when he slipped out to meet a friend. I met Melissa for coffee, smiled at her stories, and ignored the smug little smirks she thought I didn't see. On the surface, I was the same Clara, loving wife, loyal sister. But beneath the surface, I was already moving mountains. I transferred properties into trusts with ironclad clauses that made them untouchable in divorce proceedings. I shifted cash into secure accounts under new corporate shells, structures so tight even the sharpest lawyer couldn't pry them open. Some assets I liquidated entirely, converting them into holdings Daniel couldn't even begin to trace. Every dollar he thought he could claim slipped through his fingers before he ever touched it. But protecting my empire wasn't enough. I needed leverage, proof, evidence that couldn't be denied. So I began recording. A discreet app on my phone caught late-night conversations when Daniel thought I was asleep. A hidden device in my office captured Melissa's too frequent visits, her voice sweet as poison as she whispered with him. "Soon," she said one afternoon, her tone laced with excitement. "Soon she'll be out of the way." Every word they spoke became another nail in their coffin. I collected screenshots of emails, copies of messages, even a photo of the two of them holding hands in the car when they thought no one was watching. Each piece of evidence wasn't just proof, it was power, and I held it all in silence. The hardest part wasn't the planning, it was the waiting, pretending to love a man who had already betrayed me, pretending to trust a sister who would stab me in the back for the taste of luxury. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my chest heavy with rage. I wanted to scream, to shake them both until they shattered. But I didn't. I couldn't. Patience was my shield. And the more I waited, the bolder they became. Daniel started making comments about money, little digs I pretended not to hear. "You work too hard, Clara. Maybe it's time to slow down. Let me take some control." Melissa dropped sly remarks too, like, "You never know what the future holds." Sometimes life takes unexpected turns. They thought they were clever. They thought I was oblivious. One night, Daniel came home late, smelling of wine and Melissa's perfume. He stumbled into bed beside me, muttering excuses I didn't bother to challenge. Instead, I whispered, "I trust you," and turned over with a smile. Inside, I laughed at the irony. He believed those words. He believed I was still his fool. Behind the scenes, though, my plan grew sharper. I even created decoy accounts, leaving traces of untouched funds I knew he would eventually discover. I wanted him to think he was winning, to believe his plan was still intact. The more confident he grew, the harder he would fall. Melissa, too, was slipping. She started flaunting her confidence, showing up to family dinners in designer clothes she shouldn't have been able to afford. Once she made a toast, her eyes locked with Daniel's, her words dripping with double meaning. "To the future, and to everything that's coming our way." I clenched my glass so tightly I thought it would shatter, but I smiled and raised it high. Let her think her victory was close. Let her taste it before I ripped it away. Weeks passed, and the tension thickened like smoke. I could see it in Daniel's eyes. He was building up to something. His touches grew colder, his patience thinner. At times, he almost looked at me with pity, as if I were some clueless woman about to be blindsided. He didn't know that I was simply waiting for him to take the first step, to give me the perfect moment to unleash everything I had built in silence. And then, that moment came. It was a Friday evening, the sky painted gold and crimson as the sun dipped low. Daniel walked into the living room with a calmness that felt rehearsed. Melissa was already there, sitting on the couch like she belonged, her legs crossed, her lips curled in that smug little smile. My chest tightened, but I kept my face blank, waiting. Daniel cleared his throat, his voice heavy with fake regret. Clara, we need to talk. Melissa's eyes glittered with triumph. I folded my hands in my lap, tilting my head just slightly, like the dutiful wife I had pretended to be for weeks. Of course, I said softly. What is it? And as Daniel began to speak, laying out the words I had long known were coming, my heart didn't race. My stomach didn't twist. Instead, a calmness washed over me, sharper than any blade, because I wasn't the one about to be blindsided. They say revenge is best served cold, but I served mine with precision, patience, and just enough flair to make sure they felt every ounce of what they had put me through. By the time it was over, they weren't just humiliated, they were ruined. And here's how it all unfolded. After I secured my wealth in trust structures and ironclad protections, I didn't stop there. You see, my husband, Richard, and my sister, Melissa, weren't just cheaters. They were opportunists, greedy ones. And greedy people always expose themselves when you dangle the right bait. I decided I wasn't just going to survive their betrayal, I was going to turn their own ambition into the trap that devoured them. The first step was simple. I acted weak, broken, defeated. I allowed Richard to believe I hadn't fully pieced things together. I moved out quietly, under the guise of needing space to process. Melissa, ever arrogant, flaunted her presence at his side, believing they were finally winning. But what they didn't know was that I was watching, documenting, and orchestrating every move from behind the scenes. Richard's world revolved around prestige, country clubs, investors, his carefully cultivated reputation as a savvy businessman. I started whispering seeds of doubt into the very circles that sustained him. A subtle comment here, a concerned sigh there, and suddenly people began to wonder if Richard had overextended himself. Had he borrowed too heavily? Was he still the reliable partner they thought he was? It didn't take long before those whispers snowballed into hesitation, then outright distrust. Deals slipped away. Partnerships cooled. The golden boy was tarnished, and he had no idea why. Meanwhile, Melissa was easy prey. My sister had always craved status, but she was sloppy. She loved expensive clothes, glittering jewelry, and showing off. I made sure she got exactly what she wanted. A credit card under Richard's name mysteriously appeared, one I had set up through a corporate entity tied back to his accounts. Melissa used it recklessly, racking up charges he didn't even know existed until they came knocking. To the outside world, it looked like Richard was funneling money to his mistress. To the IRS, it looked like fraud. Then came the coup de grace. Remember that company Richard thought he'd built alongside his genius investments? Well, years ago, I had seeded capital into it quietly, under a different entity. On paper, I was a silent majority shareholder. Richard never suspected, because I never boasted about my reach. I let him believe he was the man of the house, the provider, the smart one. But when I exercised my right as majority owner to dissolve his position, he was blindsided. Overnight, he wasn't just unemployed. He was irrelevant. Melissa, of course, panicked. She thought she was marrying into security, that she'd walk into my old life wearing my crown. Instead, she found herself shackled to a man stripped of his power, drowning in legal battles and facing investigations for fraud. When the repo men came for their cars and the house went into foreclosure, Melissa's crocodile smile finally slipped. And oh, how sweet that moment was. But my favorite part? The gala. Months later, after I had finalized everything, I hosted a charity event under my foundation's banner. It was a glittering affair. Politicians, business leaders, celebrities. The kind of event where reputations are cemented. I walked in radiant, confident, untouchable. And then, as if fate itself had a sense of humor, Richard and Melissa appeared at the edge of the room. Not as guests, but as staff, hired help through the catering company that had picked them up in desperation. My once proud husband, reduced to serving champagne. My once jealous sister carrying trays and avoiding eye contact. The entire room noticed. Whispers spread like wildfire. Some people laughed, others shook their heads. But everyone understood one thing. They had tried to destroy me, and now they were the spectacle. Their humiliation was complete, and I didn't have to lift a finger in that moment. It spoke for itself. As I stood at the podium later that evening, announcing a new initiative that would fund shelters for women recovering from betrayal and financial abuse, I caught Melissa's eyes. They were wet with rage, shame, maybe even regret. Richard avoided me entirely, his pride shattered, and I smiled because this was the ending I had written all along. They had wanted my wealth, my life, my legacy. Instead, they ended up with nothing, less than nothing, because while I thrived, they withered. And the best part? I never laid a hand on them. I didn't scream, didn't fight, didn't beg. I simply outplayed them with intelligence, patience, and the kind of quiet power they never believed I had. So if you ever find yourself betrayed, remember this. You don't always need fire to burn someone down. Sometimes, all it takes is letting them choke on the smoke of their own lies.